Okay, Lindsay, let's talk about some of your catastrophic thoughts, right? We've identified them as the one type of cognitive distortion that you commonly have is thinking worst case scenario, right? I think we kind of understand that a little bit. One of the ones I think we kind of keep coming back to, or a version of it, is about your graduate course, especially one class in particular. And you've mentioned a few times over the past week that you're fearful that you're going to fail your exam. It's in a couple weeks. You told me you like to be proactive and try to study, but correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you're not getting as much time in that you want to study for it,
Yeah.
and you're feeling that, almost sounds confident that you're going to fail this exam coming up. Does that sound accurate?
I mean, yeah, I don't think I'm going to do well at all.
Okay. So what I want to do is decatastrophize that a little bit. A technique that we talked about is basically kind of examine this thought a little bit in more detail to kind of see both kind of compare a couple scenarios to each other.
Okay.
Look at the probability. Remember we talked about when we have catastrophic thoughts, we kind of think really, it's definitely going to happen, right? Really high chance it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And then if we think it's relevant too, we can maybe maybe plan some possible coping skills to kind of respond to that worst case scenario. Does that sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I got some questions here just to make sure. I want to ask them in a certain way. And then I'll refer to this and we'll kind of fill it in a little bit. I'll fill this one in with you, but we'll kind of talk about how that'll work for future homework assignments as well. Okay? So the first question I want to ask you is, basically, if you do fail the exam, what is the worst thing that could happen? You walk in, you try to study, you take that exam, you get it back the next week, and there it is sitting in front of you, you failed it.
I'll fail the class.
Okay.
And if I fail the class, then I'm going to fail the program. And if I fail the program, I'm not going to get a job.
Okay. So all I'm simply doing is writing down fail class, fail program, and something about your job and your promotion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you see how they kind of self-perpetuate there? It starts off with focusing on failing the class, and then it's,
Yeah.
now I'm going to fail the whole program, and then I'm not going to get that job
But
or that
I really
promotion.
might fail the
Yeah.
whole program from failing the class.
And let's see how true that probably is. I won't even dispute that yet. Let's take a look at that.
Okay.
Okay? So we just did, if you fail your exam, the worst case scenario, then it is possible, right? Won't argue that. That could technically happen. But let's see how other scenarios work out. Now this may sound a little silly. Bear with me. What is the best thing that could happen when you go in and take that exam? Is there a different outcome besides failing?
I mean, passing. I could pass.
Okay. What would be the best scenario, though?
I mean, I get an A+.
Get an A+, right? Now, to be fair, in the past, have you ever gotten A's or A pluses on past exams?
Yeah.
Okay. So it technically could happen, right?
Yeah.
You're not thinking that this one's going to happen, but it could happen.
Yeah, this class is kind of hard, though.
Okay. And so, what would be the most realistic?
I'll pass.
You'll pass. And what would be a passing grade for you?
Probably a B-, just so I can get by.
Okay. So maybe a B-, maybe a B, somewhere in the B-ish range or something like that. That's fine. Okay. Now, so we got our worst case, our best case, and realistic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's go now and do probability or chances. We've spoken a little bit about this as well. Let's just focus on, because you kind of gave me 3 different outcomes, and I completely makes sense to me why you would think that way. Well, just focusing right now on the class part, what's the chance that if you fail this exam, that the worst case scenario of failing the class would happen?
Well, I guess when you put it like that, it's probably more like 15 or 20%.
Okay. Let me use a little bit of humor, but seriously, has this ever happened before? Have you ever failed a class before, Lindsay?
No.
No, right. So this scenario, I think that's fair to put down 15-20%, but at the same time, based on past evidence, you've never failed a class before.
Right.
And I know right now what you're going through is a little bit different than the past, but we've also talked in the past you've been anxious as well, but you still end up doing better than what sometimes you think you would. So I think that's fair to say 15-20%. Now I know we had a little laugh of this. If you get an A or an A+, maybe it's around a little bit differently. What's your chances of getting an A and A plus right now? Think about it.
I would probably say closer to like 5 or 10%.
5 or 10%, okay. So not quite the same as worst case. You're still leaning more towards failing than getting an A. That's okay. the realistic one, especially based on past experience, passing, something in the B-ish, low B, mid B range. What do you think the chances are of that?
I think that's probably most realistic.
Okay.
So I would say like 20 to 25%.
20 to 25%?
Yeah. I just feel unsure.
Okay. Well, maybe let's kind of maybe revisit this in a second then as we go through this as well. You maybe have noticed that, because I'd like to get this up a little bit higher if we can before we go today. You may have noticed here, one of the things we talked about working with you when we have these kind of catastrophic thoughts is, in some ways we have other similar thoughts too that are kind of black or white, or either or. It's meaning that I either do really well or I fail. Okay? And so the reason why I did, you notice I did worst case scenario first and then best. I kind of skipped over the middle here.
Yeah.
It may seem like it's just semantics or what difference does it make, but what I'm trying to convey here is maybe more in a continuum, right? So over here, on this side, this is the worst stuff that could happen. Terrible, horrible things that could happen, right? You said fail the class, fail the program, not get the promotion, right? And then over here is like the really good stuff. I get an A or an A+. And I bet you if we consider this, we're like, oh, I'd ace the program, I'd get the job promotion with a nice raise. Like, we could go on and on with that. And so the reason why I picked something in the middle was to show that usually, that the way things work out in life, they usually fall somewhere in here between. I call this, other people call it the gray area. And so the realistic is sometimes usually the highest probability of something kind of working out or happening.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So we did this first, we did this first. Those make sense. And realistic, you're still not quite feeling it. That's okay. We'll revisit that before we end.
Well, I guess whenever I look at it like that, I could go a little bit higher.
You could go a little bit higher. Do you really feel it though, or are you just saying that to be like?
I mean, whenever I think about past experiences, it makes sense.
That's where I was going to go with you on that. Is kind of, I know the situation now feels different and unique. In some ways, it is. But historically, you went through high school, undergrad. You're halfway through your MBA program, and you're doing well. So, do you want to change that percentage now a little bit more, or come back to it later?
Yeah, maybe closer to like 40 or 50%.
Okay, that's good. So maybe at least almost a 50% chance of passing.
Yeah.
Okay, that feels a little bit better than a 15% chance of failing as well.
Yeah, it does.
And maybe before we leave here, we'll revisit that one as well. Now, I didn't leave I got a little box here, how to cope. Right? Sometimes I'll ask people questions like, what has or hasn't worked before, but you actually, because you've never failed an exam before, that's kind of hard to think about that, right? In some ways that's a strength to you, but there is a very fair question to ask is, let's heaven forbid, let's say you do fail a class, how could you possibly cope with it if you fail this exam? You go in, you take the exam. I know, now you got me thinking that way too. Let's say you go in, you take that exam, right?
Okay.
You don't think it's going to happen, but you take that exam, you come in the next class, you see a not so good grade.
Yeah.
Here you are. What are your options? How can you respond to that situation?
I think the first thing I would do is talk to my professor.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that something that would have been within my control was maybe study more in advance and have better time management skills.
Mm-hmm. And I know one thing you mentioned before, and this would be more if things are really struggling, is getting a tutor. I know your school also has options for.
Yeah.
Okay. And so those are some pretty good options, right? So you could talk, just to summarize, you could talk to your professor, kind of sit down with him or her and say, hey, what can I do? What can help out? Maybe study a little bit more. I think generally speaking, you do have some pretty good study habits. Just with all the stuff going on in life, it's understandable. It's been a little bit more stressful to maybe blocking out times, and that's one of the things we talk about, trying to block out more times to take care of other tasks. And if you really had to talk to your tutor. Another thing, too, I just want to give you a friendly reminder as well. This wouldn't be the last exam in your class, right? I think you'd have one or two more left.
Yeah.
So you know how they work percentage-wise. You did well, at least on the last exam, pretty well, I think. So if you look big picture, even if you did horrible in this one exam, you still have other exams and a big presentation at the end of the semester as well to potentially boost up that grade.
Yeah, that's true.
So what I'm trying to show here is that the chances of the worst case scenario, it seems like, is pretty small.
Yeah.
At least compared, right, to the realistic scenario. And even if the worst case scenario happened, that still wouldn't be good. It'd still stink if you fail, but you have options.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world, as we kind of say. You would possibly fail the exam, but you wouldn't probably fail the class. You probably would not fail the program. I know, I'm because I know how well your grades have been, right?
Yeah.
And also too, the job stuff. If you do well, they told you you're going to get the promotion when you get the degree. So
Yeah,
things are
that's
still
true.
looking pretty good, big picture wise. So how does that feel? How do you feel about looking at that, the worst case realistic?
Well, I guess whenever we go through all of it, it helps me realize that the probability of the worst case scenario is probably lower than what I initially thought.
Mm-hmm. And that's okay. We can even leave here out. Sometimes what I ask clients to do is I'll give you a couple of these to practice for homework. Doesn't have to be the exam, but you may notice that you write it down one day and come back to it, even before the event happens or even after it happens. Those probabilities can change just by going through a process here. And I do find writing it out is really helpful to kind of see it, right? And even using this particular order to just compare worst, best, and realistic probability. And look, even if it did, even though it probably won't, you still got skills to cope with it.
Okay.
Does that sound good?
It does.
All right.